participants are muted, and they can unmute themselves.
We are in the Gemara on Daf Nun Beis, Amud Beis, towards the bottom in the Mishnah. We begin with the Mishnah. The Mishnah here continues discussing the halachas b'negeh to animals carrying certain items on them out into the Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. Zok the Mishnah, Chamoir Yoitze b'mardas. A donkey can go out on Shabbos with a mardas, which is a saddle cloth. As Rashi explains, this is a cloth that's placed on the donkey below the saddle to keep it warm. Bisman shik shurabai, if the saddle cloth is tied to it. As the Gemara will explain what this means. Zacharim, male rams, Yoitzen Levuvin, can go out into the Rosh Hashanah Levuvin. The Gemara will explain what the expression of Levuvin means. Rechelais, ewes, Yoitzen, can go out, Shchuzais, Kvulais, Ukvunais. All three expressions will be explained in the Gemara. Ha'izim, the goats, Yoitzais, Tzurais, can go out in the Rosh Hashanah with their udders tied. As Rashi explains, they would tie the udders in order that it should dry up the milk that's coming out. That was one of the purposes. Another purpose was in order to catch any milk that comes out, that the milk shouldn't get lost. So it's a lot of go out in Rosh Hashanah. Tzrura is the udders tied. Rabbi Yosi says all of these cases are forbidden. Chutz min harechelim hakvunais. Besides the ewes that are going out, kavunais, as I said, the Gemara will explain what the word kavunais is. Rabbi Yehuda says, going back to the goats, izim yoitzais tzurais, the goats can go out with their udders tied, livash, if that is for the purpose of drying up the milk, avaloi lachalev, not if it's for the purpose of catching the milk. And the difference is, as Rashi explains, when you tie the udders in order to dry up the milk, you tie it very tightly. So there's no chashash that it's going to fall down in the Rosh Hashanah and you might come to carry it. But if it's tied to catch the milk, it's tied loosely and therefore you might come to carry it on Shabbos. Zok the Mishnah, Zok the Gemara, that is, on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. We're going back to the first case in the Mishnah where it said that a donkey can go out with a saddle cloth if it's tied onto it. What does this mean? Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar Shmuel v'hu shekshura me'erev Shabbos. When the Mishnah says kshura, it means that this saddle cloth was tied before Shabbos. Amar Rav Nachman. Now, what's the reason why it has to be tied before Shabbos? Taisus here brings a few pshatim. He brings from Rashi later that says that if it's tied on the animal, if it's tied on the donkey from before Shabbos, then it's considered to be a cloth that the animal is wearing. But if it's not wearing it from before Shabbos, you're just putting it on Shabbos, so then it's not treated as a cloth. It's not wearing it all week. It wasn't there from before Shabbos, and therefore it's just as a burden, and it can't walk out with it on Shabbos. Amar Rav Nachman, Mas Nisan Nami Deike. I'll bring you a raya from a later Mishnah that when it says here kshura, it means that it's tied from before Shabbos. Diktani, it says later in the Mishnah, Eina chamor yoitze b'mardas. A donkey may not go out with the saddle cloth, b'zman she'ein kshura loi, if it's not tied to the donkey. Hey Chidami, what are we talking about here? If the saddle cloth was just placed on the donkey and it wasn't tied to the donkey at all, pshita. Obviously, it shouldn't walk out that way in Shabbos. If it's not tied properly, it could very easily fall off and you'll come to carry it on Shabbos. Elalav, so what's the pshat on the Mishnah there? She'enik shura me'erev Shabbos. It is tied now, but you didn't tie it onto the donkey from before Shabbos. And then the Mishnah there says you're not allowed to walk out with the donkey with the saddle cloth. Miklal, so from here it's understood. In the Reisha, when it says that you tied the saddle cloth and you could walk out with it on Shabbos, shekshura me'erev Shabbos. It's because the saddle cloth was tied onto the donkey from before Shabbos. Shmami no, this is a conclusive raya that the pshat of kshura, it means that it has to be tied from before Shabbos. Tanya Nami Yochi, so too we learned in a Braisa, Chamoir Yoitze b'mardas. A donkey can go out with the saddle cloth, Bizman shekshura me'erev Shabbos, if it's tied from before Shabbos. Then it says there, V'loi b'ukaf, it can't go out with the saddle, Avapi shekshura me'erev Shabbos, even if it is tied onto the donkey from before Shabbos. And the reason is, the saddle cloth is placed on the animal to be left there all day, because it keeps it warm. The saddle, though, does not keep it as warm as the saddlecloth, and therefore the saddle itself is just considered to be a burden on the animal, so it can't go out with that on Shabbos. It's not like a garment, it's not a cloth that keeps it warm. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af be'ukif, it can go out with a saddle as well, Bizman shekshur leimer of Shabbos, if it was tied from before Shabbos, and as Rashi says, even this saddle also can warm the animal to some extent, and that it's enough for it to be considered a garment and not a burden. Ubulvad, however, there's two details here about the saddle that you have to be careful with. Masrichan, that is, you shouldn't tie straps. There were straps that were put at the front of the saddle that were used to hold on to packages when the animal is going uphill and the packages can fall back. So these straps were used to hold the packages that they should remain in the right position. And also there were other straps. There were straps that were placed in the back of the animal below its tail in a case where the animal is going downhill and you don't want the packages to fall down. So then you have to tie the packages to the back of the animal. So both of these straps should not be connected to the animal if you're going out with it on Shabbos, because they are not serving any purpose of warming the animal. It's just there as a burden, and therefore it can't be placed on Shabbos. Sagt die Gemara weiter, Boye minei Rav Asi bar Nosson me Rab Chiya bar Rav Ashi. Rav Asi bar Nosson asked a question from Rab Chiya bar Rav Ashi. Now, this is a question over here that he asks him when you get to a halacha of a saddle, putting a saddle on an animal, not regarding going out with it on Shabbos. Just b'chlal, are you allowed to place a saddle on an animal on Shabbos? Mahu litein mardas al gabe chamoyer b'Shabbos. Are you allowed to place the saddle cloth on the donkey on Shabbos? What should be the problem with this? So the Rishonim discuss this. Taisus here discusses this. Taisus says that this is considered to be a tirche yisera. It's an extraneous work, and therefore there's a question whether this is like uvden dechol, you're doing mundane activity, you're working hard on Shabbos, are you allowed to do this on Shabbos? Amalei, so Rab Chiya bar Rav Ashi says to him, mutter, you're allowed to put the saddle cloth on the donkey on Shabbos. Amalei, so Rab Asi bar Nosson asks him, V'chi ma ben zeh le'ukif. What's the difference between this saddle cloth that you just said is permitted and the saddle itself, which is forbidden to put on Shabbos? Ishtik. Rav Chiya bar Ashi was quiet. He didn't respond to this question. Now, why was he quiet? So, as Rashi explains, he understood, Rab Asi bar Nosson understood he was quiet because he asked him a question without a source. He's asking him what's the difference between placing the saddle cloth on the chamayr or placing the saddle on the chamayr. That the saddle cloth, you said, is permitted, and the saddle itself is forbidden. He didn't bring him any source for his question, so he understood that Rab Chiya bar Ashi is being quiet because he didn't hold the whole question. They're both permitted. So therefore, Eisvei, Rav Asi bar Nosson, that is, asks him a question from a braisa where you see that the ukif is forbidden, the saddle itself is forbidden to put on the animal on Shabbos. How do you see this? Because the braisa says ukif she'al gabe chamoyer, a saddle that's already on a donkey on Shabbos. Lo yitaltana biyodei, do not remove it, don't take it off with your hands. Ella, rather, what do you do? Just have it walk back and forth in the chutzner, and eventually it'll fall off on its own. But you shouldn't take it off on Shabbos. So what do you see from this braisa? Says the Gemara, if it's telling you that you're not allowed to take it off on Shabbos, you definitely are not allowed to put it on Shabbos. So here, in this braisa, I see that to put on a saddle on Shabbos is forbidden. So this is the basis of Rav Asi bar Nosson's question, why to put on a saddle cloth do you say is permitted, and why to put on a saddle itself is forbidden? What's the difference between them? So the Gemara says, Amalei Rab Zeire. Rab Zeire says to Rav Asi bar Nosson, don't ask this question. Shavke, kerabes virale, leave Rav Chiya bar Ashi. He holds of the opinion of his teacher. Rav Chiya bar Ashi said of the name of his teacher Rav, when it comes to putting things onto an animal on Shabbos, toilin traskel lebeheme b'Shabbos. You're allowed to hang a feed basket for the animal on Shabbos. That it shouldn't have to bend down to the ground to eat the food, but it's a basket that's hanging on the animal that it can eat from it, you're allowed to hang that on the animal of Shabbos, on Shabbos that is. And most definitely you can place the saddle cloth onto the animal on Shabbos. What's the kal v'chomer? If placing the basket of feed for the animal, which is only for the purpose of pleasure, so the animal shouldn't have to bend down to the ground, it should be able to eat with pleasure. Shari, that's allowed to be done on Shabbos. Hacha, the mishum tsar, over here, the animal is cold, it's freezing cold, and you want to give it, you want to warm it up, take away its suffering. Lekol shekain, for sure, you're allowed to place the saddle cloth on the animal on Shabbos. This is Rav's opinion. So again, Rav holds you can do these things for an animal on Shabbos, even though it might be a tirche yesera, it might be like a mundane activity, too much of an extraneous work. You're allowed to do it for the animal's sake, whether it's to alleviate it from suffering, or whether you're doing it in order to just increase or help it with pleasure that it should be able to eat properly. Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says mardas muter, to place the saddle cloth is permitted. That's taking away its suffering. Teraskol asa. But to hang the food, the basket of food for the animal, that is forbidden. Ozla Rab Chiya bar Yosef went and Amra l'shmaite de Rav kamei de Shmuel. He repeated the opinion of Rav in front of Shmuel that you're allowed to place on the animal even the basket of feed for it. Amalei, so Shmuel responded, Ihachi Amar Abba. If this is what Abba says, which is refers to Rav, as Rashi says, Abba means my friend. If this is what Rav said, Lo yoda b'mili de Shabbat v'lo klum. He knows nothing about Hilchos Shabbos at all. In other words, it can't be Rav says such a thing. How could Rav say such a thing? It doesn't make any sense. Kisalik Rab Zera, when Rab Zera went to Eretz Yisrael, as we learned already a few times, Rab Zera at a certain point left Bavel and went to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechel Rabin Yamin bar Yefes, he found Rabin Yamin bar Yefes, the Yosef v'ka'amalei mishmei de Rab Yechanan, which repeated in the name of Rab Yechanan, Neisnen merdas lagabe chamer b'Shabbos. You're allowed to place the saddle cloth on the donkey on Shabbos. Amalei, so when Abzeda heard this, he responded and said, Yasher, well said. V'chein tirgeme Aryoich beBavel. This is what Aryoich said in Bavel. Who's Aryoich? Aryoich refers to Shmuel, and he's called Aryoich, which is an expression that refers to a king, because he was very bucky in halachas, so therefore he said, Shmuel said, like what you said, you're allowed to place the saddle cloth on the donkey on Shabbos. Manu Shmuel, this is Shmuel. Frag the Gemara, wait a minute. V'harav nami omra. Rav also said you're allowed to place a saddle cloth on the animal. What was the argument between Rav and Shmuel? Only regarding the traskel, which is for the sake of the pleasure of the animal. But as far as the mardas is concerned, everybody agrees you can put that on the donkey. So what's the chiddush over here that he's telling you that Shmuel said this? Ella, rather, the continuation of the story there is Shamei, Rab Zeder heard Rabin Yamin bar Yefes that have a Messiah Bay, that he continued and he concluded and said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Ve'ein Teilim Traskel b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to hang this basket of feed for the animal on Shabbos, like Shmuel said. Amalei, and on that he told him, Yasher, well said, V'chein Tirgema Arya beBavel. This is also what Shmuel Aryech said in Bavel. The Gemara weiter, the Kul Alma Miyas. Either way, what do we see here? Everybody agrees that Mardas Mutter, to place the saddle cloth on the animal on Shabbos, is Mutter. Why? Ma'ishna me ukif. So we come back to our original question that we had before, why a saddle cloth is allowed to be put on the animal and why the saddle itself is not allowed. This was the question that Rav Asi bar Nosson asked Rab Chiya bar Rav Ashi. The Gemara never answered it. So the Gemara explains, Shani Hasam, the Efshe, the Nafel Memela, that really the whole diuk that we had in the Braise is not a correct diuk. The Gemara brought a Braise that said that you see that you're not allowed to take off a saddle from the animal. And the Gemara said if you can't take it off, for sure you can't put it on. That was our source, that you're not allowed to put the saddle onto the animal on Shabbos. So the Gemara now says, no, you can't make that diuk at all. You know why you're not allowed to take off the saddle from the animal? Because it can fall down on its own. The Efshad enough from Mamela, as the Braisa there says, have it walk back and forth and eventually it will fall off on its own. To put it on, since it doesn't happen on its own, that may be allowed. So therefore the Gemara now is saying that you're allowed to put on both the mardas and the ukif, the saddle cloth and the saddle onto the donkey on Shabbos. Papa says no, there is a distinction between the saddle itself and the saddle cloth. Kan lechamama. When you put on the saddlecloth, what's the purpose? You want to warm the donkey. Kan letzanina. To take off the saddle. Why do you want to take off the saddle? If you see that the donkey is very hot, so then you want to take it off to let it cool off. Lechamama. So therefore we say as follows. To warm the donkey, islatzaida. This is something that the donkey is suffering from. So it's very cold, and therefore you're allowed to cover it in Shabbos with the saddlecloth. Letzanana, just to cool it off, less lotzaida. This is something that it does not have tsar from, because the donkey naturally is always very cold, and even if it's hot right now, it's going to get cold immediately, and therefore you're not allowed to take off the saddle to cool it off. And the hainu, the amri inchi, this is the statement, and people say about the nature of a donkey. Chamra, a donkey, Tammuz, even in the month of Tammuz, or in the tkufa of Tammuz, when it's extremely hot, kiridele, he's still cold, and therefore he's suffering when he doesn't have a covering on his back, and therefore you're allowed to put on the saddle cloth, but not remove the saddle, which is not for the purpose of alleviating its suffering. It's a famous statement in the Gemara. Chamra afilu b'tkufas Tammuz kiridele. The Rebbe quoted it very often when he get to the time in the summer, that chamra, a person that is very megushim, he's very coarse in his behavior and in his character, doesn't refine himself, and he's coarse like a donkey, afilu b'tkufas Tammuz. Even in a time period like Tammuz, when the sun is shining with its fullest intensity, and it should be hot, there should be a revelation of godliness, kiridele. He still is cold because of his overindulgence into the chamayr, into the chumriyas of Elam Haza. That's the way that Rebbe quoted this Gemara very often. Sagt the Gemara weiter. Meisvei, another question was asked over here from a Braise on this halacha, that you're allowed to place a saddlecloth onto the animal on Shabbos. So the Braise says as follows: Lo yetzi asos biznav shual. A horse should not go out in the Shusarabim on Shabbos with the tail of a fox, which is placed between the eyes of the horse for the purpose of getting rid of an ayin hara. And not with a red ribbon sort of that it has between the eyes. Okay, and what's the reason for this? It's just a decoration. It's not a decoration that people usually put, so therefore it's not something that's allowed. Now, another halacha, layetzi azov b'kis shaloi. Azov should not go out with the pouch used that helps a person inspect to see if he's still azov or not, or if he has an emission or not. This is a halacha that we had before in Daf Yud Aleph here in Shabbos. We learned about this barichis, about when azov is allowed to go out with a pouch on Shabbos. And goats are not allowed to go out with a pouch used for their udders. And a cow should not go out with the muzzle on its mouth. And the colts may not go out with the feed bags around their mouths in the public domain. V'loi behema besandal sheberagleha, and an animal should not go out with the shoes on their feet. V'loi bekameya, and also not with an amulet. Afa pishu mumche, even if this is an amulet that we know works and it's created by an expert and it worked already 3 times by other people. Nevertheless, as Rashi here says, nevertheless you shouldn't use this amulet for the animal to go out with it on Shabbos. This is more stringent regarding an animal going out on Shabbos than a person going out on Shabbos. Exactly which case this chaymer by the behemah refers to, the Gemara will explain. An animal could go out with a bandage on a wound, or with a splint on a broken limb, or a placenta that's partially dangling out of the animal's body. It's allowed to go out with that on Shabbos. And then another last halacha here. This is not regarding going out into the Reshus HaRabim. This is even within a Reshus HaYachid. If it has the bells that are hanging on it, so you have to stuff up the bell that it shouldn't ring, it shouldn't make a noise, and you're allowed to walk around with it in the chutzah with these bells. But it's not allowed to make this noise. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to have these things making this extra noise. Okay, this is an interesting thing just to point out. Also, benegeh to today, a Sefer Torah, which has a crown that has bells on it. So we are careful to make sure that the bells do not have that piece inside that cause it to make the sound that a bell makes. I believe, if I remember correctly, this is something that the Rebbe requested benigeh to the Sefer Teiris, that on Shabbos they should remove the inside. I believe you go in other places, they're not nizar in this, they do have the bells with the pieces inside that make the noise, but over here you see in the Gemara there's an Indian on Shabbos not to make this noise, and it's our minig to take it out on Shabbos. Okay, now what is the Gemara bringing up this Braisa before? This Braisa is actually a question on Rav. I made a mistake before. I said it's going to be a question on the case of a mardas. It's actually a question on Rav that said that you're allowed to place the basket of feed on the animal on Shabbos. What did it say over here? Ketani Mias, in this Braisa it said, V'loi siyochin b'traskelim shebepiem l'reshus harabim. That the siyochin cannot go out with the traskelim, with the feed basket, by their mouth into the reshus harabim on Shabbos. L'reshus harabim hu deloi. Only to the reshus harabim it's not allowed to go out. Ha b'chotzer shapedami. But if it's in the chotzer, it is allowed to go out with it in the chotzer on Shabbos. And the Gemara understands that this Braisa means that you're allowed to even place the basket on the animal on Shabbos, even though it doesn't say it clearly in the Braisa. But Tosfos over here says that only over here regarding this case does it say reshus harabim. Even though the Chayre, most of the Braisa is speaking about going out to the reshus harabim, it never elaborates and says that word reshus harabim. Only regarding this case it says reshus harabim. So therefore the Gemara is medayik that the issue with the traskel, with the basket of feed, placing it on the animal, is only regarding going out in the reshus harabim. In the chotzer of the reshus hayachid, it can go with the basket of feed even if you placed it there on Shabbos, which is a question on Rav's opinion. My love, don't you think, Bigadailim, we're talking about animals that are more mature, and Mishum Taino, again over there, for them, the only reason to place the basket is for an extra pleasure. What's the story with the animals that are more mature? So they have big knees, they're very tall, but they also have long necks that they can bend down, not so difficult for them to bend down to access their food. So giving them the basket of feed, not to have to bend down, is just for a purpose of pleasure. And still the Braisa says it's forbidden. So the Gemara says, Loi, that's not what this Braisa is speaking about. We're speaking about Biktanim, young animals, Mishum Tsar. For them, it's a suffering to have to bend down to eat the food, because when these young animals have very high knees, but they have short necks, and therefore it's painful for them to always have to bend down to eat their food. So the young animals, you're allowed to place the basket of food over there for them, even according to Shmuel. Everybody would agree to this. Yeah, sagt the Gemara weiter. Deikenami, the right, this is Tiktani Dumyem Dekameya. Because it says here in this Braisa, when it talks about placing the feed for the animal, it's similar to the case of Kameya. What's the amulet used for? To alleviate the suffering of the animal, to get rid of a certain sickness the animal has. So just like over there it's talking about getting rid of the suffering of the animal, so too over here we're talking about getting rid of the suffering of the animal, that we're talking about young animals that have a difficult time bending down to the ground. Okay, we go to the next Gemara, but I think I misspoke before when I said that this Braisa is a question on Rav. It was a raya to Rav. And the Gemara explains that it's not a raya to Rav, because over here even Shmuel would agree and say that we're talking about a traskel that's alleviating the suffering of the animal, and therefore it's allowed to be put on. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Omar Mar, we're going to this case of the amulet. So the Braisa said, V'loi b'kameya. You can't put an amulet on the animal to go out with it on Shabbos, afa pishu mumche, even if it's an amulet that's been proven by an expert. Fragt the Gemara, but for Hanan Tanan, what we learned in the next Perek regarding a person, that v'loi b'kameya she'enu mumche. He's only not allowed to go out with an amulet if it's created by someone that's not an expert. Ha mumche shapedami. But an amulet that's been proven and it's made by an expert, then he's allowed to go out with it on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Hachanami, here by the animal as well, she'ena mumche. We're talking about the animal going out with an amulet that was not made by an expert. Fragt the Gemara, but v'ha alfa pishahu mumche katani. The Braisa clearly says that the animal is not allowed to go out with this amulet, even if it's made by an expert. So how can we say this? So the Gemara answers, Mumchel Adam ve'ena mumchel behema. What the Braisa meant to say is, even if it was made by an expert, that's an expert for amulets used by human beings, if he made an amulet for the animal, you can't go out with it. But if it was an amulet made by somebody that's an expert for amulets made for animals, you're allowed to go out with it on Shabbos. Frag the Gemara, what does this mean? Is there a person that's an expert to make amulets just for human beings and not for animals? So the Gemara says, yes, in Adam the Isle Mazala, a person has a mazel. And therefore, Messiah, the mazel supports him. Behema de lesle mazala loy Messiah. The behema that does not have a mazel does not have that support of the mazel, and therefore the expert making it for human beings not necessarily is an expert to know how to make the amulet for the animal. As Rashi here says, the mazel we're talking about is malach shaloi, a malach or meilit salov, a malach that is that defends him, that talks good for the person. A person has a malach that defends a person lamaila. An animal does not have this kind of a mazel. So of course everything in the world has a mazel, including even a blade of grass. But this kind of malach, which is a meilitz, that speaks for the person's positive for the person, that's only by a human being and not by an animal. Sagt die Gemara weiter, so the Braisa then said that there's a stringency regarding an animal going out on Shabbos even more than a person. But now we just explained, when it comes to an amulet, the halacha by both are the same. A human being or an animal is allowed to go out on Shabbos with an amulet if it's made by an expert for the animal and expert for the person. If it's made by someone that's not an expert, so then you're not allowed to go out with it on Shabbos. So there's really no difference. So what's the chaymer? Answers the Gemara, misavres akameya koi. Do you think that this chumra, the statement of the Braisa, was referring to the amulet? A sandal koi. It was referring to shoes, that an animal is not allowed to go out into the Rishus HaRabim with shoes. A human being, of course, is allowed. And that's the chumrah that the Braisa was talking about. The Gemara now returns to what we learned before, the negate to the halacha of placing a saddlecloth on the animal of Shabbos in order to alleviate the animal's suffering. So the Gemara brings a Braisa as a question on this. Tashema, we learned in a Braisa, Sochin or mefarchasin la'adam. You can anoint a person, and you could also scrape off scabs from a person's body on Shabbos. But you can't anoint or scrape off the scabs from an animal on Shabbos. My love, what is the pshat here? The ikem make, there's a wound, and the animal is suffering from this. Umishum tsar, and there's suffering, and you're not allowed to do anything to alleviate the suffering of the animal, to anoint it or to remove the scab. Sagt the Gemara, no raya. It's not what we're talking about. The gama maka, the wound is already done. It's not painful for the animal. But umishum tainuk, it's just for the purpose of pleasure to anoint the animal or to remove the scab, and that's not allowed to be done on Shabbos. So this, as Rashi points out, will explain how this Braisa can work with Shmuel's opinion. Shmuel said that you're only allowed to alleviate the suffering of the animal and place a cloth on it on Shabbos. Rav held that you even allowed to place a basket of feed for the animal on Shabbos for the purpose of tainug. Here, according to the answer of the Gemara, this Braisa is talking about the purpose of tainug, and it says that it's not allowed. Therefore, Rashi says, Rav Tanahu Upalig. The Gemara is not giving an answer for Rav's opinion. Rav actually argues on this Braisa here. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Toshama Behema Sha'achza Dam. An animal that had a congestion of its blood. You can't place it into water that it should cool off to alleviate its suffering. Adam a human being that has this congestion of the blood, you're allowed to place them into water in order to alleviate this pain. So what do we see here? That to alleviate the suffering of the animal, it may not be done on Shabbos. So this is a question both on Rav and Shmuel. So the Gemara answers, there there's a different issue. There's a gzeira that Chazal made, you're not allowed to do something which is healing the animal. It's not just alleviating its suffering, but it's doing something which is sort of a refuah. We have the general gzeira of not using anything or doing anything for the purpose of a refuah on Shabbos. because you may come to grind the samamonim, the whatever is needed to create the medicine on Shabbos, so therefore there's a gzeira against doing any refuah on Shabbos. That's over here why this is different. If that's the case, Adam Nami. So a person should also not be allowed to go into water to alleviate the suffering, to heal himself from this congestion of the blood. And for the Gemara, Adam nireke. When a person goes into the water, it doesn't look like he's doing it for the purpose of healing himself, it just looks like he's cooling himself off. And therefore it's allowed. Say the same thing regarding an animal. An animal going into water on Shabbos, it just looks like it's cooling itself off and there's no healing over here. And for the Gemara, ein maker lebehema. No, it's not ordinary, it's not the customary for an animal to go and cool itself off this way, and therefore people will see that it's pretty apparent that it's being done just for the purpose of healing, and therefore the gzeira of refuah on Shabbos applies. Fragt the Gemara, migas rinan, this gzeira of refuah, does it apply to an animal? And the Gemara will bring you a braisa here, where you see that when there's a concern of losing, of the hefsid of your animal, of losing the animal, that it could die or could whatever, it's a problem of hefsid that you might lose your animal, then Chachamim did not apply their gzeiris. So we should say the same thing here. What does it say in the Braisa? Vatanya, we learned in the Braisa, if a person's animal is standing outside of the tchum, so at this point the Gemara thinks the pshat over here is that the animal is outside of its owner's tchum. Right? A person is only allowed to walk 2,000 amas on Shabbos, and now your animal went outside of your tchum, so you can't go and get it. So what does it say? Kairala, you can call the animal, vihiba, and it'll come into the tchum with you. So what do we see over here? Even though really there's an issur for you to do this on Shabbos, nevertheless, you're allowed. Chachamim did not apply their decree in this case, and they allowed a person to bring back his animal on Shabbos by calling it and bringing it back into the tchum on Shabbos. What's the reason? Because there could be a hefsid, a financial loss, and therefore they're allowed to do this. And the gzeira that they say that Chachamim would usually apply in this case, that the person might walk out and go bring his animal in, does not apply, because over here the animal may just walk off and he's going to lose his animal. So the same should apply before, beneged to an animal that has a congestion of its blood. The gzeira of refuah shouldn't apply, that you should be allowed to place it into cold water to heal it. And Zok the Gemara, and for the Gemara, Amar Avina, the answer is Kagain shahayat tchum shala muvla b'tchum shalai. We're not talking about a case where the animal is outside of your tchum. We're talking about a case where you have your tchum and the animal has its tchum. What does that mean? How does the animal have its own tchum? Because before Shabbos you gave your animal to a shepherd that's taking care of the animal. So the tchum of the animal goes according to where the shepherd is, and the owner has his tchum. So the animal is inside the tchum of the owner. So really there's no problem for the animal to go to that place where the animal is. Okay, but the animal though has walked out of its tchum, and therefore it can't come back into the tchum. So therefore, what this Braisa is saying is that you're allowed to call the animal and it'll come on its own, but you're not allowed to take it by hand. If it just comes on its own, that's allowed. It's allowed to go out of its tchum. But if you're not allowed to take it by hand out of its tchum on Shabbos. But we're not talking about a case where Chachamim removed their gzeira for the purpose of not allowing your animal to go get lost. So therefore we have no question from this case. Sagt der Gemara weiter, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Omar, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak says, Shchika samamonim gufa tanoi. This case, whether you're allowed to make a refuah for an animal, is a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, we see in a Braisa clearly a machlokes regarding this subject. Is there the gzeira of Chazal regarding refuah, not to do a refuah on Shabbos, does that apply to an animal? Behema she'achla karshinin, a behema that overate, it ate a lot of karshinin, a lot of vetches, and it has to, it's sick and it's suffering and it has to relieve itself. Don't have it run back and forth in the chatzar in order to soften its intestines that it should alleviate itself. Right? So because that's your healing. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to do for an animal something which is uniquely for the purpose of refuah. But Rabbi Yishia mater. Rabbi Yishia says, or as the Ger says on the side of the Gemara, Rabbi Yishia says it's allowed. Darash Rave, so Rave darshans halacha kerab Eishi or kerab Yeshi, we pass like kerab Yeshi that the gzeira of refuah does not apply to an animal on Shabbos. Going back to the brayse that we had before, Omamar lo yetzi azav b'kis shaloi, azav should not go out with its pouch, v'lo izim b'kis shebedadayen, and goats should also not go out with the pouch that's placed on their udders. Frek the Gemara, but vatanye, in another brayse we learned, yetzis izim b'kis shebedadayen, that goats are allowed to go out with a pouch that's placed on their udders on Shabbos. Rav Yehuda answers, lekashya, there's no contradiction here. The mahadik, the case where it says that it's allowed is because the pouch is placed tightly and we're not afraid that it's going to fall off. The loy mahadik. And the case where the bracelet says it's not allowed is because it's placed loosely and we're afraid it's going to fall off. That was Rav Yehuda's answer. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says, wait a minute, tanoi shaklis mi alma, you're removing all of the tanoim of the world. In other words, this is a subject that's been discussed by other tanoim, and we clearly see that this is a machlekes tanoim. Tanoi, this is clearly a machlekes tanoim, as we have already learned in the beginning of today's shir in the Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, so the Tanakama said, ha'izim, goats are allowed to go out with their udders tied, and he made no distinction how it's tied. Either way, goats are allowed to go out with their udders tied. Rabbi Yosi Oiser Bekulan, and Rabbi Yosi says no, it's forbidden for the goats to go out with their udders. He asks us all the things mentioned over there in the Mishnah, chutz min aracheles hakvunos, which the Gemara is going to explain soon. But then Rabbi Yehuda, a third opinion regarding the goats tying the udders. So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was, izim yotzes tzrurais, you can tie their udders livash, if you want to dry up the udders. Avaloi l'cholev, not if you're milking them. So we see right over here that there are three opinions in the Mishnah regarding this subject. So if you have a stira in the braises, there's no problem, it's just two different opinions over here. The Bayisayim, what now the Gemara says we can say regarding the two braises mentioned before, Havaha Rabbi Yehuda. They both are following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. V'leikashia, and there's no question, because we see Rabbi Yehuda made a distinction. Depends how you're tying the udders. Kan livash, the braisa that said that it's allowed is because you're drying up the udders and then it's tied tightly, and it's not a problem that it's going to fall off. And also Rashi here adds another point, when you tie it tightly to dry up the udders, so the animal that's milking, it weakens the body of the animal. You dry it up and it doesn't have to milk anymore, that strengthens the animal. So that's something that's a purpose for the strengthening the body of the animal, and it's not just considered to be a burden. And kan l'cholev. And then the other case where it says it's forbidden is because it's being placed there to catch the milk. And then it's tied loosely, number one, and therefore could fall off. And number two, it's considered to be an extra burden for the animal because it's not helping the animal itself. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Ma'aseh be'izim beis antuchya. There's the story of the izim of beis antuchya. Shahoyu dadeim gasen. They had very, very big udders. V'osel and kisim, and they made these pouches for them. Kedei shelo yisretu dadein, so that the udders should not scrape. And that's allowed to be done on Shabbos, since it's being done for the purpose of the animal on Shabbos. Tana Rabbanon, since we were talking about the udders of the animal, the Gemara brings in a very interesting story. There was a story with an individual that his wife passed away. She left a son that had to be nursing. He didn't have any money to pay somebody to nurse the child. A nes happened to this person, and the Eibishter gave him 2 daden, they should have breasts to be able to feed this child. And he fed this child. An unbelievable nes. Rav Yosef came and said about this story, see how great this person is. The Eibishter performed such a kind of miracle for him. Abaye commented and said, Fakert, Adarabe. On the contrary, look how low this person is, that the Eibishter should change his Sidrei Bereishis for him, and he wasn't deserving to get the schar, to afford to be able to pay for somebody to nurse him. The fact that he couldn't afford that shows how low he was. That's Rashi's pshat. Rashi's pshat. The Marshoyer says, Garu Adam Zeh means, we learned already in the Gemara Brachas, when the Eibusha performs a miracle for somebody, Menakelam Mizchiyasa, you deduct from his merits. So therefore, this person, Taka, experienced a great miracle, but now he's Garua because his merits has been deducted from him. Sagt die Gemara weiter, another thing we can take out of this story. Amar Rav Yehuda, boy urei kama koshim is a nice of shaladam. Come and see how difficult it is for a person to make his parnasa, to have his food. Shenishtanu all of sidrei bereishis. That the Eibush changes over his sidrei bereishis and couldn't get him food. The food, the parnasa, is something that the Eibush did not change sidrei bereishis for. So that's something that remains extremely difficult for a person to get. Instead, the Eibush changes and makes a miracle that he should have breasts to feed his child. Rav Nachman says, Teida, I'll prove to you that parnasa is something that's difficult. The misrachish nisa, the Eibishter here, this is the way Rashi explains the Gemara. Misrachish nisa means we see often, or more often, that miracles happen to save a person's life, but we don't see often at all a miracle happening where a person suddenly finds more wheat in his storehouse, that he has extra food in his house out of the blue. For that we don't see miracles occurring. So we see that the Eibush does not make miracles so easily regarding parnasa, and therefore that's why Kashem is a nice of Shaladam. The Rebbe comments on this Gemara, this last point here, and brings the famous point that's always brought in Chsichis and in many places from the Drashas Aran. The Aran says, the Eibusha does not make a nes for no purpose. And therefore here the Rebbe says the source of that can be seen right here in the Gemara. When it comes to saving a person's life, the Eibusha makes a nes. It's mamish an extreme situation, for that the Eibusha will make a nes. But to create parnasa for a person, that he should find wheat in the storehouse, for that the Eibusha doesn't necessarily create a nes. Adarabba, the Eibusha wants things to function in the world al pi derech hateva, that a person should work for his parnasa al pi derech hateva, and therefore the Eibusha doesn't so quickly make a nes for such a kind of thing. Sagt die Gemara weiter, a story with an individual that married his wife that had her hand cut off. And he did not recognize this fact until the day she passed away. So Rav commented and said, look and see how modest this woman was. She covered herself and he didn't notice. That her husband didn't even notice this. Rav Chia says, no, doesn't prove anything about her modesty. For her, this is normal. And then as Rashi over here says, first of all, it's normal for a woman to cover herself, and second of all, especially in this case, when she has such a handicap, she wants to cover it, and therefore he didn't notice. Look how tzniistic this person is, that he didn't notice that his wife had his hand cut off. So this Gemara is very interesting because there's a famous Gemara in Kiddushin that says, a person is not allowed to marry a woman until he sees her and he looks and only then is he allowed to marry her. So what's the pshat? How is he allowed to marry her and he didn't even notice that she had her hand cut off? So there's a similar question that's asked regarding Avram and Yitzchak, when it says that Avram did not even recognize his wife Sarah. Only when they came down to Mitzrayim he recognized her. And by Yitzchak, that Eliezer was sent to go bring her to him, and the Kiddushin was made even before Yitzchak saw her. How is it possible? Now, Avram and Yitzchak did not see their wife before they married them. So one of the answers that's given is, when you're talking about such great people like Avram and Yitzchak, and there's no concern, even if they're not going to see their wife, later whatever they discover, it won't change their relationship, it won't bring to any issues of shalom bayis, you're allowed to get married even without seeing your wife in advance. So over here, apparently this person was on such a caliber that even without looking and seeing his wife in advance and noticing that she has a hand cut off, he was allowed to go ahead and marry her. Okay, the next Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. I think we'll leave it for tomorrow. We'll continue Mitzvah Shem, the Gemara tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Atzlacha Rabbe. Only good news in everything we do.